Once upon a time in a quiet African town, there were two families living in neighboring houses. The Okafors were a well-to-do family who gave their son, Abuka, everything he wanted. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor believed that spoiling their only child was a sign of love. They rarely monitored what Abuka did, allowing him free rein with his gadgets and friends. On the other hand, the Nwokas were a middle-class family who struggled to make ends meet. Despite their financial challenges, Mr. and Mrs. Nwoka instilled discipline in their daughter Ada. They made sure they knew what she watched, who her friends were, and how she behaved in school. Both children attended the same school, Golden Star Academy, where Abuka and Ada were classmates. Ibuka, with his flashy gadgets and trendy clothes, became the most popular boy in school. Ada, though quiet and reserved, was known for her intelligence and kindness. One day, Abuka noticed Ada's consistent good grades and decided to befriend her. Ada was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed, hoping that their friendship could help Ibuka improve in school. What Ada didn't realize was that Abuka had other plans. At home, Abuka spent hours watching violent and inappropriate videos on the internet. His behavior began to reflect what he saw. He became more aggressive and manipulative. He often bragged about tricks he learned online, like how to bully someone without getting caught. One afternoon, Abuka convinced Ada to skip their after-school program and come with him to an abandoned building near the school. "I saw this cool challenge online," he said, grinning. "We can try it out." Ada was reluctant but followed him, unsure how to say no. As they entered the abandoned building, Ada felt a chill run down her spine. The place was dark, dusty, and filled with broken furniture. "Why are we here, Ibuka?" she asked nervously. He pulled out his phone and showed her a video of kids balancing on narrow beams over a deep pit. "It's easy," he said, pointing to an old plank of wood stretched across a hole in the floor. "We'll just record ourselves doing it. Everyone will think we're brave." Ada hesitated, but Abuka laughed. "Are you scared? Don't be such a baby." The pressure was mounting, and Ada, afraid of being mocked, reluctantly stepped forward. Just as she was about to step onto the plank, a loud creak echoed through the room. Both of them froze, hearts pounding. "Did you hear that?" Ada whispered. Ebuka brushed it off. "It's probably just the wind. Come on." At home, Mrs. Nwoka noticed that Ada had become unusually quiet and withdrawn. She also noticed that Ada had stopped talking about her day, something she usually loved to do. When Mrs. Nwoka asked her what was wrong, Ada shrugged and said, "Nothing, Mama." But one night, as Mrs. Nwoka passed by Ada's room, she overheard her daughter whispering, "I don't want to do it, Ibuka. It's too dangerous." Alarmed, she knocked on the door. Ada quickly ended the call and opened the door, forcing a smile. "What's wrong, Mama?" she asked. Mrs. Nwoka wanted to ask about the conversation, but decided to observe for a little longer. Meanwhile, Mrs. Okafor noticed Abuka spending more time in his room with the door locked, but she dismissed it, thinking, "Boys will be boys." She didn't question him or check his browsing history. One afternoon, Abuka convinced Ada to meet him at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. This time, he had brought a few other classmates. "We're going to record the ultimate video today," Abuka announced, pulling out a rope and a bag. "What's in the bag?" Ada asked nervously. "Just some props," Abuka replied casually. He tied the rope to a beam high above the floor and explained his plan. "We'll swing across the gap one by one while everyone records." Ada's heart sank. The gap was wide and the floor below was covered in jagged debris. "What if the rope snaps?" she asked. "It won't," Ibuka said confidently. "I tested it myself." One by one, the kids swung across the gap, cheering as they landed on the other side. When it was Ada's turn, her hands trembled as she gripped the rope. As she swung, the rope suddenly slipped from the beam. She screamed, but luckily one of the boys caught her before she hit the floor. "See? Nothing to worry about," Ibuka said, laughing. But Ada had had enough. She ran out of the warehouse, vowing never to follow Ibuka again. One day during a school assembly, the principal announced that a student had been injured after attempting a dangerous stunt they saw online. Parents were invited to a meeting to address the growing influence of social media on children. Mr. and Mrs. Nwoka immediately connected the dots. That night, they sat Ada down and gently probed her about her recent behavior. After some hesitation, Ada broke down in tears and revealed everything: how Ibuka had pressured her into dangerous stunts, and how scared she was to refuse him. The Nwokas were horrified. They decided to inform the school and the Okafors. But when they spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, they were met with disbelief. "Not my son," Mrs. Okafor said indignantly, her voice rising. "Ibuka is just a boy. Boys like to experiment. He would never do anything to put himself in danger." Mr. Okafor, visibly irritated, added, "Perhaps Ada is just misunderstanding things. Our son is confident and adventurous, not reckless. Let's not overreact." Mrs. Nwoka sighed, trying to reason with them. "We've already noticed some strange behavior, and these stunts are getting more dangerous. This isn't about accusing Ibuka, it's about protecting him." But the Okafors wouldn't hear it. "We know our son better than anyone," Mrs. Okafor snapped, her tone final. That evening, Ada overheard her parents talking. "What else can we do?" Mrs. Nwoka asked, her voice filled with concern. "If the Okafors won't listen, Ibuka is going to get himself or someone else hurt." Mr. Nwoka sighed deeply. "We've done our part by warning them and the school. Let's just keep an eye on Ada and make sure she doesn't get dragged into this again." But Ada couldn't shake the fear that something terrible was going to happen. One afternoon, Ada was walking past the school's sports field when she overheard Ibuka and a group of boys huddled together. She crept closer to hear what they were saying. "We'll climb the old water tank behind the school," Ibuka said excitedly. "I've seen it done online. If we film it, people will go crazy over the video." One of the boys hesitated. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Ibuka replied confidently. "We just need to be careful and make it look cool." Ada's heart raced. The water tank was tall and rusty, and climbing it was extremely dangerous. She wanted to warn him, but she was too scared to confront him in front of his friends. Instead, she ran home and told her parents. That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Nwoka decided to report Ibuka's plan to the school principal. "We have to do something before someone gets hurt," Mrs. Nwoka said firmly. The principal called Ibuka into her office the next day. "We've received a report that you're planning something dangerous," she said sternly. Ibuka's face turned pale as the principal continued. "Your safety is more important than likes or shares online? Do you understand the risk you're taking?" Ibuka didn't respond. He looked down at his shoes, his confidence replaced by shame. Later that day, the principal called an emergency meeting with all the students. She spoke about the dangers of attempting risky stunts for social media fame, showing videos and stories of young lives ruined by one careless act. As the principal's words sank in, Ibuka's classmates began to distance themselves from him, realizing the gravity of what they had almost been part of. When Ibuka got home, his parents were waiting. The school had informed them about his plan. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor were furious, but for the first time they realized their anger came from their failure to pay attention. "We've been so focused on work and giving you freedom that we didn't notice what you were doing," Mr. Okafor admitted. "We let you down." Ibuka broke into tears. "I just wanted to feel like I was good at something," he said. The Okafors hugged him tightly and promised to be more involved in his life moving forward. In the days that followed, the Nwokas and the Okafors decided to team up with the school to educate other parents about the dangers of unmonitored social media and peer pressure. The school organized workshops where parents were taught how to monitor their children's online activities and talk to them about risky behaviors. Ada watched with pride as her parents shared their experiences with others. Although she had been scared at first, her decision to speak up had helped save Ibuka and potentially other students. The moral lesson of this story is that every parent needs to be involved in their child's life. Paying attention to what your child talks about, watches, and displays can make all the difference in preventing tragic mistakes.